Hey guys, welcome back to Nora's Table. We are sitting down with Casey Keene, who is part one of our multiple part segment that we're doing called presentations. So we'll be doing different things like bipolar, autism, ADHD, and how they present differently, not only in adults and children, which is kind of a given, but how they can also present differently in men versus women, and why it might be hard for women to get certain diagnosis. So, Casey, open us up. Who are you? Give us a location of self.
Hi, I'm Casey Keene. Recently saw Hedwig and the Angry Inch and realized I was not straight. So I identify as a bisexual female with a kid, and I don't know what else to say, but hello.
You are.
Like yelling.
Your race?
I had to turn mine down as well.
Are you good?
Yeah.
I think I'm
Oh,
good.
you turned
yeah.
me down.
Oh, I did?
Yeah. You're number one.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Are you white, biracial?
I'm super white.
Tell us about what your husband does, because I think his artisticness is interesting.
So my husband is a filmmaker, primarily dabbles in horror movies. And by primarily, I mean, that's all we've really made so far. We're just wrapping production on our third feature film and moving into post-production, which just is a lot of fancy words for now he has to sit in his office for a couple months and edit it. But he also has a YouTube channel where he talks about Blu-rays and kind of like niche movies.
Nice. I've seen some of his stuff. He has something called vinegar syndrome. What is that?
So Vinegar Syndrome is it's a boutique Blu-ray company. They basically like restore older movies that didn't get a proper release. So they take the film and make it better. This is not my wheelhouse. I have it's my step fandom. I kind of understand. But he does a lot of editing for their documentaries and the like behind the scenes features that they do on the Blu-rays, which are different than DVDs. Do not call Blu-rays DVDs in our house, so he will be very cross.
So something I really love about you, and I think that we've hit off from the get-go, was how open you are about talking about your mental health. I think because there's such a stigma around mental health, it's kind of like you almost have to walk on eggshells with new people to see where they kind of stand, like how much you can get away talking about that kind of stuff.
Definitely.
And you from the get-go have been very open. Do you want to talk about what it is that you struggle with?
Sure. So I have bipolar 2, which is the less severe, isn't necessarily the right term for it, but it's different than bipolar 1. So instead of having full-blown, like, really manic episodes, I have what are called hypomanic episodes, which are still terrible. They're not my favorites, but the swing up is a little bit less. I still have really severe depressive episodes, but I also rapid cycle, so I go through it too much. It's and can swing pretty rapidly, and it's exhausting.
Can you tell us what happens when you go through the swing? How do you know it's coming? What does that cycle look like for you?
It kind of depends. A lot of times, I don't realize that I'm manic until I start crashing, where I'm like, oh, I thought I was feeling really good. No, just manic. But it kind of feels like I don't know, like I start getting overwhelmed at messages and start seeing like the number of unread messages go up, and I'm like, oh no, we're going one way or the other.
And that's when you're cycling into the depressive episodes?
Usually, and I kind of I'm just gonna adjust this card really quick.
And for people listening too, there's different types of bipolar. So there's bipolar 1 with the mania, which is typically people that are bipolar, they actually really like the mania feeling. It's tons and
It's like
tons of
euphoria,
energy.
isn't it?
Yeah, tons of energy. But when it becomes an issue, a problem, is when they start behaving and doing things that they typically normally wouldn't do. Having sex with a lot of random people, maybe spending all of their paychecks to buy a one-way plane ticket to Canada because tomorrow they're moving there. Things like that,
So like
where it's
impulsivity.
like very impulsive. And so that can be very concerning. And then you have your baseline, and then you can dip down into really severe depression. And so when Casey also mentioned rapid cycling, that's multiple cycles. So that hypomania, which isn't the severe mania, but there's a hypomania, the baseline, and the depression, which happens pretty quickly within the span of what, a month or 2 months?
Uh, Sometimes I feel like I've like gone through it in probably like a month or less.
Mm-hmm.
The depressive episodes typically last longer for me, and like the manic episodes, they're great while they're happening. It's coming out of it that doesn't feel great because I'm like, man, I was really annoying, or that's why I have as many tattoos as I have. They were all booked while manic, and I didn't want to cancel because I felt really awkward. So now I have several. I love them though. So
I imagine with bipolar 1, because that's what we were talking about with like the severe manic episodes.
Mania,
Yeah.
yeah.
I imagine it's probably hard to have stable relationships unless you're with a very supportive partner who kind of goes through those swings with you. Is it hard to also hold like a job, or like you work with a charity? Is it hard to commit to other things in your life that need stability and structure and scheduling and things like that if you're going through mania?
uh, I've definitely had a hard time with jobs. Like I stick through them, but like have really bad like anxiety and get really kind of crash with them a little bit. Like it'll go really well when I first start, and then I'm like, oh, why am I doing this? And like regret it, and then kind of like impulsively apply to other things sometimes that might not be the best choice, but YOLO, I guess. The charity doesn't really affect me like that. I think because it's not like I don't have to go every day. And like the work that I do with it is kind of behind the scenes, and I don't mind like putting an event up on Facebook or anything like that. It's not like going into the office every day, which was a little bit hard. My last office job was with Caesars Entertainment, and when I went back after my maternity leave, I was there for like a month and a half before COVID hit, and I had to get the intermittent FMLA because I was having such bad anxiety attacks. So basically, my doctor was like, "You can miss work like one day a week so that you don't kill yourself." Which sounds extreme, but it's basically like we got to protect the mental health because it can. The stats with bipolar disorder and suicide attempts and all that, they're kind of scary. It's a pretty high percentage. I feel like especially during mixed episodes, which is when you're like kind of up and down at the same time. Yeah, I'm not a fan.
You mentioned having anxiety attacks. Is that a typical part of having bipolar 2, or is that like a comorbidity that you also deal with anxiety?
It's like both. Like I feel like when you've got like one, you typically have others that kind of go with it. I have like a Band-Aid anti-anxiety medication, but I'm not on like constant anti-anxiety medications, if that makes sense.
It's as needed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So your rapid cycling happens within the course of like a month, right? So walk us through how long mania lasts. Then do you go straight from manic right into depressive? Do you kind of coast for a little bit, then get into depressive?
It's hard to tell. That's something I'm kind of working with my psychiatrist, is kind of what my baseline is, because I don't really know what it is anymore. Because it's been a long time since I was, I'd say like properly stable. I think we're getting there. This is the highest dosage of medication I've ever been on. And I'm feeling okay. I have like some energy. I folded laundry today and put it up,
Ooh.
which with the help of a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
Which,
That's a success for anybody.
Yeah,
so-
it truly is.
so, yeah, it's kind of hard to say. Typically, I feel like I just go from like one to the other. And there's not a huge transition period, which is, it's fine.
Do you feel like the headspace that you're in now compared to where you were when you were pre-diagnosed, how much of a difference is that? Like, how much of a game changer is medication and going to see a psychiatrist? And
It is an absolute game changer. I felt like I was going out of my mind. I got diagnosed when I was 20. Um, and I had dropped out of college 3 times by then after like finishing high school as like an like honors student. I did really well in school, then got to college and was like, oh, I am mentally ill. This is not working. And I've tried to go back, like do like online classes once or twice. I'm like, F it. It's for cooler people than me.
Is it hard to commit to a class schedule when you go through rapid cycling?
It's hard to do the work. I am like a professional procrastinator, and then I get too overwhelmed and then just shut down, which is the same thing I do with housework. Like it'll start getting messy and then I get really overwhelmed that it's messy, and then like the executive dysfunction kicks in. I'm like, well, everything is terrible. I'm the worst person in the world. I'm never going to be able to do this. And I just kind of like look at TikTok.
It's like a vicious cycle too, because you are so overwhelmed by the work that you don't do it, and then it just becomes more overwhelming because it's not getting done.
Yeah, it's good times.
When you cycle through your hypomania, is that when you get all the things done?
I wish. I really wish I was
No?
more productive in my hypomanic episodes. I mostly just commit to a lot of things. I like I said, I commit to tattoos, or I get involved in like other volunteer work, or I make plans to be social, and then the mania wears off and I'm like, no, I don't want to see anybody. But the social anxiety kicks in. I'm like, I can't let anyone down, but also I don't want to be perceived. So it's, I don't know.
Did you? Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Have you, how has your diagnosis affected your relationships with other people? Romantic relationships, friendships, family, all of them.
My family's been really supportive. We have mental illness kind of runs in my family. My dad's youngest brother is schizophrenic. And so I grew up around somebody with a very, very severe mental illness. And because we kind of talked openly about my Uncle Miller, as well as, like depression and other parts of the family, I felt really comfortable going to my parents and being like, hey, this is something's not vibing. Like I need to find a doctor and get this taken care of. So they were great. Michael, my husband, we like re-met because we met each other when we were teenagers. But then when I was 20, we ran into each other like over the summer. So I was like fresh in my diagnosis, fresh on like new meds. My grandmother had just died. A childhood best friend had just committed suicide, and my cat had just died. So like I was not in a great space. And that is how we got together. And he jumped right into being like super supportive and has been nothing but supportive since then.
So amazing.
Does he understand when you're going through your rapid cycling? Like, or do you have to explain it to him like, I'm feeling depressed today? Or does he just kind of get it? Because you guys have been together for a long time.
Yeah, we've been together 11 years, and bless his heart, he is a great, great man. He's a great husband, but he is not the most observant all the time.
That's just men in general.
But we've talked a lot, and recently I've tried to like be more open with him and be like, look, when I'm like this is what I need from you. And he's started getting more comfortable talking to me, being like, hey, when this happens, like this does not feel great, because I don't ever want to use my mental illness as an excuse to be a shitty person. And he's really like, he's very good at understanding when I'm overstimulated. So he asks before hugging me. Like if I'm like stressing out and look like I'm about to cry, he'll be like, do you want one? And I'll be like, no, like, please don't touch me right now. And he understands that, which I really appreciate, because being touched when you're overstimulated is like the worst thing. But so yeah, I got really lucky with him. Friends, for the most part, have been really great. Like there's one situation where a group of friends saw me during my first mixed episode in a really long time. And I typically don't be like that around other people. Like I try to keep that at home and kind of just mask as much as possible, but I couldn't. And they couldn't really hang. And I tried to talk to them about it afterwards, and they didn't want to give me any grace Because I was like, look, I'm trying to take accountability for my actions here, but like also I felt like I was literally going insane. And that sucked. But it was also really eye-opening because like another friend group that was there saw it and like took care of me and wouldn't let me apologize afterwards because they were like, look, that's not you. And we know that. We want to help you. So sometimes it's good to have really bad experiences with people so that you don't continue being their friends.
Did you have a hard time opening up to people after that incident? Like, because that would kind of turn me off, I think, if I was like trying to explain, I'm sorry for acting this way, but this is why that happened. And they just kind of were not willing to hear it. That would be hard. It would make it hard to open up after that.
Yeah, it like luckily I talk about it so regularly, like most of the people in my life know about it. They don't necessarily know how bad it gets both ways, but they know that it is something that exists, and that's kind of where I want to keep it with most people. I mean, I will talk about like really bad episodes publicly because I think it's important, especially when you're someone who on the outside looks like you kind of like have it together and are like, okay, be like, hey, so I know at this event, like I was with it on the outside, but like inside it's a really big struggle. And if you feel that way too, it's normal. Like it's normal to feel bad sometimes. And it's important to seek like medical treatment if it doesn't go away or if it's a recurring thing. Being diagnosed was one of the most like relieving things that has ever happened to me because I had a name to it.
Yes.
And I had a plan of attack. And I know it's something I'm going to fight with for the rest of my life, which sometimes I have a really hard time contending with. But at least I know what it is. So it's easier to fight monsters when you know what they are.
Yeah. Earlier you mentioned masking. So Lauren, tell us what masking is. And then Casey, I want you to tell us how you masked.
Oh, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I imagine it's just kind of acting like you're in a play and internally you're feeling one way, but to outside people it's something completely different. And it's just like how I hide these things from everybody else finding out about what they are.
Yeah, I don't think it's like a legit, like a, not real's not the right word, but a
Medical term.
there we go. But it's a good way of describing kind of what it is, where it's like there is in public Casey, who is, if I have a task or if I have something to do, I can just focus on that. And then there's like the inside Casey, which is just a mess all the time. I feel like the dog and the like fire meme all the time. I was like, this is fine.
He's just sitting in a burning building.
Yeah.
Like that sums up my mental health most of the time. Like we gonna make it.
So do you feel like you have to be on in certain situations or around certain people?
Yeah. And then the crash after that is really hard because
It's exhausting.
it's like when kids go to school. They're on all day and then they get in the car with you and they fall apart because they had to keep it together the whole day. They had to be people, and being a person is really draining, like especially when you are a small person.
Small person with big emotions.
Yeah,
Such big
feelings.
emotions. But yeah, and there's like, I feel very lucky that like I don't have to be like that with a lot of my friends. Like I feel like I can be myself with you guys, which is awesome. Like we spend time together and I don't feel super drained afterwards, just normal tired because sleep. My kid doesn't sleep well. But then there are other like when I have to be like more professional, a lot of times I get really just like drained after the fact, especially like hospital visits. When we go in costume to visit the kids, I'm so tired after that because have to like push back like triggers because there are going to be kids crying because it's a hospital. And sometimes they talk about really heavy stuff and you have to just kind of like push it back and like become detached from it in the moment and process it afterwards. Like we always check in with each other afterwards, which is great. But usually after visits, I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody else. Like after the check-in, I want to sit in my car and listen to music for a few minutes and then go home and go to bed.
Something I really admire about you is you don't have a problem telling people when you're low on spoons.
I love the spoon theory.
Yeah,
I
so
don't know what this
that's where I'm
is.
going with this is I want you to explain it. But there's been times where I've asked you like, hey, are you up for doing this? And you'd be like, I don't really have a lot of spoons this week. And I really admire that about you because I catch myself sometimes after I've made a commitment to somebody like, yeah, we'll meet up or we'll do this. That day comes and I'm like, I do not have the energy for this. I don't want to back out. I don't want to be that friend that's like flaky, but sometimes I do not have the mental capacity for it.
Yeah.
And so I like that you were so open and honest about like, hey, I don't have that space for you right now. And I think more people need to be like that and be honest about the load that they're carrying and the storage that they have for extra stuff. So explain what spoon theory is.
So spoon theory is basically like at the start of the day, you get a certain amount of spoons. Like, I don't know why I did the playing the spoons instead of the eating with the spoons. I'm from the South. Cut me some slack. And certain things take more spoons than others. Like making a doctor's appointment. That is a big spoon activity for me. That takes quite a few. Like going for a walk sometimes is like a high. It depends on what space I'm in already. And sometimes you start the day with like less spoons than others or just none. And you're like, okay, it's going to be one of those days. Incredible. Another way I've heard it described is so like, I'm a big nerd. I don't know if you guys know this.
What?
I know.
Who
Shocking.
told you?
The one who went to the Dungeons and Dragons movie with their D&D party last night and matching t-shirts is a nerd.
That sounds like a blast to me.
It was so much fun. But is with spell slots. So like in Dungeons and Dragons, when you play a caster, you get a certain amount of high level spell slots and like lower level or things called cantrips, which you could just kind of cast at will. And like some things are like a higher level spell slot, which would also like equate to being like a lot of spoons. So it kind of depends on it. Who I'm talking to is where I'm like, we are out of spell slots today. Sorry, friendo.
So like going on like a play day with your kids would be 2 or 3 spoons. Making your kid a sandwich a particular way might be like a half a spoon, but you have to make your spoons last till the end of the day. So I've heard this used with like chronic pain sufferers, especially with like, I use it for migraines. So like if I have a migraine today, I'm like, all right, I got like 4 spoons, 5 tops. So the things that you ask of me today, really, we got to make these spoons last till bedtime because I need like as much like downtime and time to rest and relax because you can get more spoons throughout the day if you take time for yourself.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've heard it for like chronic pain is.
It's such a good shorthand. Like it's just such a good way to be like, hey, look, this is not personal, which I really appreciate that you don't take it personally where I'm like, I love you. I want to see you. I cannot today. I wish I could just teleport because like getting in the car sometimes is a really high spoon activity. But yeah, it's a good way to just quickly be like, sorry.
Well, and also if you are low on spoons and you make yourself go anyways, that's not the best version of yourself to bring. I would rather not go and have the rest of you guys have a good time without me than me go and be bummed out or tired or dragging or like just not myself that day. So it is a good shorthand to just be like, I don't have it in me today. Sorry.
It takes a lot of self-awareness to just really know yourself and really know, okay, when do I need to give to myself and then when can I exert myself a little bit more? Because depending on there's multiple factors that factor into this. Mental health, pain, like you said, being a parent, how the day goes with your child, and then also a little bit of being an extrovert versus an introvert. How do you recharge your emotional battery? Do you recharge by being around people or do you need some alone time? And there's nothing wrong with either of those. So I think it is really important to find people that are supportive and understand and you can communicate these things and they say, okay, yep, I get it. I understand. And you don't have to feel bad about it.
Yeah, I feel like we're at a point in our lives, at least with me, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I'm at the point where if I feel like I have to be on around someone, they're not my people.
Yeah.
They're not for me. And there could be nothing wrong with them. It's just the way that our personalities are. If I feel like I have to change myself to be around someone, they're probably not for me.
It's fair.
Yeah. And it's I think it's important to, and it's definitely something that comes with like time and like life experiences, is realizing you don't have to be really good friends with everybody in your life. You can be like, there are different levels. Like, you can have your longtime best friends, you can have your like running errands friends, people who are just like friendly acquaintances, or people you have like a working relationship with. And you don't have to give your entire self to them. You can set boundaries
Mm.
and keep people at not like kind of an arm's length. Be like, you're not a bad person, but you're not someone I want to spend a lot of my energy on with this friendship.
Yeah, like doses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, talk to me about what life looked like for you prior to your diagnosis. What made you decide I need to get some help? I'm not feeling right. Did you have a lot of the symptoms in your like late teens?
Yeah. So I was first diagnosed with depression in middle school. So I was kind of like aware that the chemicals were not quite right for a decent amount of time. And I always had really bad mood swings, which I kind of, for teenagers, you chalk it up to hormones a lot. And like recently realized that I have PMDD, which I probably had then as well, which is basically just like PMS that makes your brain go, um, which I'm not a medical professional. But that's basically what happens, like, kind of.
Yes.
But yeah, and like college is when I realized I was like, something is not like clicking right. Like I don't know what's going on. I'm all over the place. Um, in high school and in college, I was having a lot of physical issues. Like we thought I had endometriosis for a while, and then like thought I had like gallbladder issues or something. And it turns out I was just having really severe physical manifestations of like anxiety. And which, yay, it wasn't, because endometriosis sounds terrible. But it was kind of interesting that they went the physical route first before maybe being like, let's talk to a psychiatrist or a therapist and see if maybe there's something underlying here, because the body and the brain relationship is super weird, and it definitely like self-sabotages
Yeah, it's so
a
crazy
lot.
how much stress the body takes on and presents in different ways when it
Mhm.
has nothing really directly to do with what's going on.
Yeah. So that's kind of was I guess the main things I was seeing. Uh, and did some research on Dr. Google and went to my parents one day and I was like, I think I might be bipolar. Can you help me find a doctor? And then I was with the same doctor for like 10 years. He was great, and recently found one in Vegas that I really like, which, man, it is hard to find a good doctor.
It is.
But she is incredible and has been really good at understanding how certain medications can like push you more like manic or depressed. And she's like, always asks, have you been like leaning more this way or that way before I adjust your medication? Because I don't want to send you into an episode, because you have to be really careful. And it doesn't always work, and sometimes it's a bad fit, and that's just part of life with psychiatric medication.
Yeah, meds are definitely trial and error. That's why they call it practicing medicine. Did you have to go through a lot of med adjustments before you found one that was good for you?
I've been on a lot of, I call them cocktails. I've been on quite a few over the years, and they'll work for a while and then stop. Or the like physical side effects are not worth the like payoff with the brain working part. But I think what I'm on now is working pretty well. Fingers crossed. We switched to new anti-anxiety like Band-Aid medication as well. And so far that's been better, because I was on Ativan for a long time. And I was starting to, when it wore off, just have the panic attack again. I was like, this isn't great. So we have switched to clonazepam.
Did you struggle with relationships prior to having a diagnosis and knowing, like having some tools under your belt, knowing how to navigate?
Yeah, I'm sorry to everybody that I dated before then, because they all lasted 3.5 months, and then I was bored and broke up with them. And then I met Michael, and we've been together for 11 years. So it's finding the right person and
Yes.
also like realizing that maybe you're unwell. And that's part of why you are sabotaging these like decent relationships. Like they were all, well, for the most part, like we're fine. They're okay guys, but they weren't the right fit.
Mhm.
But yeah.
So with Casey, your physical symptoms presented as you thought it was like endometriosis, which is like a primarily female issue. With men, if they have physical manifestations, how does that present?
If it's anxiety, it could be physical pain, chest pain, feeling like you're having a heart attack. Depression sometimes manifests differently in men, I've noticed. They don't put a name to it. And it might be because women are more open to talking about these things in the first place. And typically for heterosexual men, it's almost shamed to where, okay, I feel low energy. The things that I used to enjoy doing, I don't like doing them anymore. I don't like leaving the house. I'm struggling. Those are kind of the terms that I've heard. And then when I present, do you think that this could be depression? It almost takes them off guard,
Mhm.
where it's like, whoa, I didn't even think about that. And
They don't want to be perceived as like weak.
yes.
Because depression for some people is just such a mind game.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, no, there's nothing that could be wrong with me mentally,
Mm-hmm.
because I would be weak,
Yeah.
which is
And
sad.
yeah.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, bipolar gets thrown around, that term gets thrown around so much to where if somebody is struggling, if somebody is having some depression or they're showing even just any emotion, it gets thrown around, oh, they're just bipolar, yada, yada, yada. And not only does that negate that individual's experiences, their emotional experiences, but then it also puts a bad light on people that are actually diagnosed with bipolar.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so,
it makes it like a joke.
mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I don't like that either.
Yeah.
And it never bothered me until somebody really close to me was diagnosed with it. And then every time I heard people using it as a joke, I would like cringe. Like, it'd make my eye twitch.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, oh, you're just being bipolar. Like, bitch, you don't even know what the fuck that is. Do you want to talk about bipolar? Because I can tell you the last 3 years of my life that have been affected by bipolar disorder. This isn't a joke just because someone's having an off day. Like, oh,
Very true.
that don't get me
The
started.
weather is bipolar today, and I'm like, I will box you
Right?
right in the nose.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's being the weather.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so
I have a question for Casey. Are you concerned about your child inheriting any mental illness?
Yep.
ooh, that's a good one.
Very much
Is it
so.
genetic?
Bipolar typically is genetic. Typically, when we're diagnosing bipolar, we'll ask the individual, is there anybody in your family that has a mental health diagnosis? There's a lot of times where there's somebody close to them, a parent, a aunt, uncle, a sibling that is already diagnosed with bipolar. If it's not bipolar, it's some other diagnosis that they previously have. So there is some sort of genetic factor that goes along with it.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm very concerned about and will keep a really close eye on as he grows up. And also one thing that I'm already trying to do is be really open with him about it and always make sure he understands that when I'm having a bad day, it is not his fault, but explaining sometimes my brain doesn't work right and it makes me sad when I don't need to be sad, but it's nothing you did. And I'm hoping by putting like names to all of this and explaining it, he will be able to recognize it in himself. If he starts having symptoms, I just think being really open with your kids to it, age appropriate and like things that they need to know. Like your kids don't need to know every single bad thing that is happening, but if it's something that is affecting them because it is affecting your behavior, you need to make sure they know it is not their fault or they will internalize it. And it's a whole thing.
Yeah, I think your son's really lucky to have a parent that is open about it. So he will never have to feel ashamed by any things that he's feeling or going through. He'll be able to come to you about it. We had started talking about the different types of bipolar. You went over one. Did we start on two? Because you said there was like four, right?
No, there's bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and then there's fast cycling and then slow cycling, which means um, you could go in a span of 12 months and maybe only have 2 episodes, but that's still considered bipolar. So there's some individuals where I think that I had a client personally where it took me a full calendar year until we discussed the diagnosis of bipolar because I needed to see all of her cycles to be able to say, okay, I think this is what's happening. And I think she had 2 manic episodes and 2 severe depressive episodes. And then we presented it, and she also got a referral for a psychiatrist as well. And then that's how it was approached. So there can take, this is why Casey was also saying it can take a long time for somebody to be diagnosed, because there's a lot of different factors that we have to factor in. Is this another diagnosis that maybe we're weeding out? And then I have to see somebody cycle.
Is that hard for you as a clinician um, to watch the cycling? Because typically you only see a therapist, once a week? Or with that patient, how often were you seeing her?
Yeah, I think it was, if it wasn't once a week, it was biweekly.
Okay, so but in 2 weeks' time, depending on the kind of bipolar that she had, she could have already cycled through that time and been back to baseline or through another part of the episode in between appointments, right?
True.
So
Yep.
was that hard to pinpoint because you weren't getting to see like every day of what was going on?
She's also telling me what's going on. So there's that level of trust of, okay, this is what I've done this last week. And then we can have an open conversation. Do you think that this was a manic episode? Like, this looks like mania. And then when you present it that way, usually people, they might not see it while they're going through it. It takes like some hindsight. Also, like Casey said, like the hypomania, she doesn't necessarily notice until she's coming down from it, right? So it sometimes it takes going through it and then looking back on it and saying, oh, okay, maybe this is what was happening, and being able to talk about it. Mood journaling is really good for just, I think, anybody in general, but also specifically people with mood disorders. It's really good to sit and write down daily, what am I feeling? What's going on? Identifying those emotions and potentially the triggers that are also happening, and then looking back on it and seeing if there is a cycle.
Is suicide more prevalent in people with bipolar disorder?
Um, because of the depression, I wouldn't say more prevalent, but it is a very big concern. So with somebody that has bipolar that has either previous suicide attempts or suicidal ideation, one of the first things that I like to focus on is creating a safety plan. So, we'll sit and we'll document, okay, when I'm feeling this way, these are the steps that I'm going to take to prevent myself from going any further.
What are some of the symptoms if somebody's looking into like, okay, something feels off, I think it might be bipolar. I'm not really sure what of the 4 it could be. What's a easy or a good way to narrow down how you're feeling, like which box you more fit for bipolar? Are there any major changes between the 4?
And I don't want to say that there's 4. It's just that there's subcategories of the
Okay.
two, of bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. There's like subcategories, just like there's comorbidities. So if somebody's looking at it, trying to identify what it is, like Casey did, she did her own research before she went to a doctor and said, hey, this is what I think it is. There's a lot of times that by the time somebody comes to me for therapy, they've already identified their diagnosis or the issues that they're wanting to work on. There's a lot of, I believe people have a lot of self-awareness when they're coming in because they've already been thinking about it. It might have taken several months before they've gotten up enough courage to actually reach out and talk to somebody. And so a lot of times, especially with the internet, people have done research and they're like, or with TikTok, like I'm scrolling on TikTok, and I personally don't have TikTok, but I have clients that do, and they'll send me videos and they're like, I relate to this. And I've seen some really good stuff on there where I'm like, oh wow, like this is actually very relatable, and it's nice that that's out there and it's being talked about in the community. So there's also a dangerous side to this too, in the sense of you can relate to so many mental health disorders to where you're like, I have everything.
Mm-hmm.
I relate to all of these. And if I was to hand you or anybody our diagnostic manual, you can look at it and you can say, wow, yeah, I do experience these things. Even listening to Casey, it's like, okay, yeah, I can experience these mood swings and these emotions and what I'm feeling, but that doesn't mean that you have a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's important to meet with a professional so that we can sit down and we can go through that criteria, because there's things that we know that we're able to diagnose to give you that label. And some people love that, love having it. Just like Casey said, like there's so many times where I've seen people cry where they're just like, I have been struggling with this for years, and finally you've put a name to it, and I get this sense of relief. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, oh, it feels good.
Yeah, it's nice to not feel like you're just a crazy person, that there's actually something going on.
Right.
Yeah. Especially if you have, like, if your circle or your village aren't quite supportive or maybe think something's going on, but to be able to say, like, no, I'm not an asshole. Like, I'm actually struggling with this. Have you ever seen children with bipolar?
No, so that's a stipulation for diagnosing bipolar. The individual has to be 18 years old.
Why?
It's something that we are not able to diagnose until somebody is 18.
Because it can present as like it shares a lot of symptoms with other things. Like there
Correct.
have been times where I'm like, am I bipolar or do I have borderline personality disorder?
Yes.
Which is one I've kind of gone back and forth. And we confirmed bipolar recently, but it's mostly because like my anxiety manifests as rage now, which so cool. But like with kids, I think it's hard too because they're growing, so they're already all over the place. So it's hard.
Their emotions are dysregulated.
Like I feel like major mental illnesses can be diagnosed in kids, but things that are kind of like can be 11,000 things. You got to wait until they're kind of the brain's chilling out.
Yeah.
So bipolar and borderline personality disorder are similar?
They look similar on the outside. People that struggle with borderline personality disorder, they have very intense mood swings. They attach to people very intensely, and then they end up pushing them away. They're not able to necessarily regulate their emotions. The difference is typically they have these cycles very, very quickly, much more quickly than somebody with bipolar. So it could be in a day span. They love you, and then all of a sudden they hate you, and then they're depressed and they're crying about it in the span of maybe an hour. And it's very intense and it's very, very quick cycling. There's other factors that help with the diagnosis, but that's just kind of an overall view of what you can see to just kind of understand that it is different than bipolar.
So with you said you guys had just kind of put the staple in bipolar recently. Do you mind sharing what it is that was like the final deciding factor?
Well, I kind of like phrased that weird because like I was diagnosed at 20, but he went as long as he could without putting it on paper because he didn't want that to follow me for like as long as he could, because people, they are really weird about bipolar because they don't understand it. They think if you're bipolar, you are just like off the wall all the time and like can be dangerous. Like, no, I'm just people who are like super manic just want to have sex with you. Like it's because that's like for like the severe mania is like hypersexuality.
Yes.
Oh yeah. So but when I found my new psychiatrist, I was like, I want to just like make sure, because after having a kid, like everything kind of changed. My symptoms changed, how I was like handling things changed, because I had really severe postpartum depression and anxiety. So like coming out of it, I was like, I don't know who I am anymore or what's going on. But because I've had at least one manic episode is why she is putting me in that box, essentially. Which not that boxes are bad things, but that's, we talked about it, and that's how she explained it to me, why she was sticking with that diagnosis. And that's how we were treating it, if that makes sense.
So your doctor didn't want to give you the official diagnosis on like documentation Because you said it would follow you.
for insurance.
Yes.
Because it is technically qualifying like, disability, which is it's not wrong. Like, because I live with it every day. It's not something that can just turn off. It's not something that's ever going to not affect me. Sometimes it'll affect me less. Sometimes it'll affect me more. But it is always there. And like insurance is weird about stuff, and like just other doctors can be weird about stuff too, like physical doctors, because there's so much misinformation and so many taboos about mental health in general, but especially mood disorders. Like I feel like mood disorders are really, really misunderstood, and they're very like not very common, but they're more common than I think people realize. Like it's not something that like you could go your whole life without meeting someone that has a mood disorder. You definitely have. They just might not talk about it, or they might not know that that's the name for it. Because I feel like, like my parents' generation, a lot did not get diagnosed. You okay?
Yeah, I don't know what that was. I apologize. I might need an exorcist.
Oh, we're in Vegas. I'm sure we can find one.
Sorry.
We're going to take you to the Haunted Museum.
My bad. I'm really sorry. As soon as I heard it, I was like, nope.
It's perfect.
Yeah. Blooper.
Yeah. So can insurance come after you and hike up your rates for having this? Because you said it was like a qualifying disability.
I'm not 100% sure. I personally choose not to work with any insurance whatsoever because it's such a battle, unfortunately.
Is that why? Is that the reason? Like when you document things, insurance can. I always thought it was because you guys
No.
just didn't want to deal with like the paperwork of like
That too.
getting paid.
No. Yeah, personally, that's why I don't work with insurance. But I know that if you ever wanted to go in the military and you have a mental health diagnosis, it's frowned upon. There might be other jobs like that, maybe with special security. They'll look at your insurance, look at your diagnoses. And it's really unfortunate because I think you and I have talked about this before, but it affects vets and it affects police officers and other people in the community that are working these high security jobs that need mental health services, and then they're afraid to seek it because of the repercussions. But I think that's just unfortunately the society that we're living in right now, where it's number one, mental health isn't very well studied. And we haven't been studying it that long. And then there's not too much that's known about it. And then our society is already shaming people that have mental health diagnoses.
Yeah, and I think we kind of touched on TikTok earlier. I think it's been both like good and terrible for the like mental health community, because there is some like really good, really relatable stuff that is kind of like evidence based, and then there's a side where like younger people especially are self-diagnosing and not seeking professional help to back up the self-diagnosis, and there could be barriers, with finances, stigma, all that. But I see like a scary side to it where you've got these kids that think they have these like really severe mental illnesses. And I'm like, I don't want to, discount what you're feeling. But like when I was your age, I just wrote a lot of fan fiction or like LARPed essentially, like role played instead of, I feel like DID is getting really self-diagnosed because it's rare.
DID is dissociative
Identity disorder.
Identity disorder.
And there's like a huge, like TikTok mostly of like younger kids, like teens who are saying they have it and they've self-diagnosed. And again, I never want to discount anybody, how they're feeling, but like that takes a lot of trauma.
And it's very rare, like you said. So it was previously named for maybe somebody that's listening that's like, what? It was previously called multiple personality disorder. And it is very rare. In my career of 12, 13 years, I've never met anybody with that diagnosis. And I've worked in psych hospitals. So it's not something that's very common.
Speaking of hospitals, and you kind of mentioned earlier that um, people like MDs tend to treat people with bipolar disorder differently. Have you ever experienced that?
That's a good question.
Not personally, mostly because I typically, or I've pretty much always had a psychiatrist. So the doctors were like, we are going to just not, we're going to leave that alone. Like, you're they're taking care of you. Cool. Don't want to touch it. Um, but it's also one of those things that, like, I, afraid isn't necessarily the right word, but I've always been concerned about potentially needing to be hospitalized at some point. Um, because those are, mental health professionals. However,
Comma.
I think the way that, like, inpatient is handled in this country, and in Vegas too, it's like geared more towards like people with addictions, and doesn't necessarily, it's not an environment you necessarily feel comfortable going into. Like, I've come very close to having had to be hospitalized, but I have never had to. I've had friends that have been hospitalized, and I've like visited them and heard from their experiences, and I wish it was better. Because I've seen videos on TikTok of other people in other countries who, like, they can have their phone, they have more sense of self and power. I feel like a lot of hospitals take away all of your power, and they want to keep you safe, but they also just, it's isolating, it's stigmatized. You can't really cope because you're not in a place where you feel safe. You're not in a place where you feel comfortable because, the door is always open. You're like wearing scrubs, and you can't have anything that makes you feel like a person. You kind of get what I'm saying? Like, it's, I wish it was different. If it was better and I felt more comfortable with it, I would have probably checked myself in at least once or twice, because I feel like I have been at that point before. But I was like, I don't want to have a bad experience and make everything worse,
Mm-hmm.
because they can also mess with your meds, because there's some really strong medications, and I've always been afraid of getting on them because they're just so, like, sometimes you need them and sometimes they work, and I'm like, but I don't want to be on them unless I have to be. And if I do, that's fine. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Like, I've had my psychiatrist tell me before. He's like, we might have to go with lithium at some point if other things stop working. But I always try to go path of least resistance first. Like, right now I'm on Wellbutrin, Seroquel, and mirtazapine. Mirtazapine? Mirtazapine?
Mirtazapine, yeah.
Mirtazapine.
And people listening, like any listeners that are possibly relating to what Casey's saying, the dosage and the type of medications that she's on is specific for her.
Yes.
And her brain chemistry and what she has disclosed with her medicating doctor. So just because somebody has bipolar and you also have that diagnosis and you listen to somebody who's like, I'm stable on these meds, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you.
Right.
And if you are struggling and it gets to a point where you do need to be hospitalized, please trust your doctor, your therapist. If they tell you this needs to happen, there's probably no other choice.
Right.
And it sounds scary, it sounds unfortunate, but it's for your benefit. And there's pros and cons to all of it.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to going and not going if you need inpatient care.
Well, and I want to add on to what you said about the medication. If you start a medication, you're nervous because this is all kind of new to you, and you get on something that maybe you're not jiving with, it doesn't make you feel your best, you're kind of feeling bogged down, whatever it may be. There are so many medications out there. Do not get discouraged because the first one you tried is not the one for you.
Right.
That's completely normal and it's okay. And now you know what doesn't work. You do process of elimination. Just bring it back to your doctor and be like, this is not working for me. What else you got?
Mm-hmm.
And don't be afraid to call your doctor.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
if the medication is really not working and it is like sending you down like a really bad rabbit hole, please call your doctor, call your emergency line if it's after hours, and be like, you gotta adjust something. Like, this is not great.
And don't stop taking your medication
Oh my gosh,
unexpectedly.
please don't ever. I have done that. I stopped cold turkey off Wellbutrin before. That was terrible. I felt so sick. You really have to wean like on and off medications, because they're so in your system and have, I don't know, like skipping Wellbutrin like on accident is, I can always tell because it makes me feel sick and I'm just like, oh, get back in my body.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't want to like discourage anybody from that, like talking about the hospitalization. That was just more of a, I wish it was different in this
Yes.
country.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I do wish it was different as well.
But I really don't want to discourage anybody from seeking help if it is at that point. Because like my friend I visited, they needed that in that moment. And it was a good like learning experience, but wish it was better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also don't want to discourage the person that I am connected to that has bipolar disorder. I don't know if this person would be comfortable with me mentioning names or anything, so I won't mention a relationship. But they are scared. They have other health issues going on, and they're always afraid when they go to the hospital that they're going to be discounted what they say or whatever, because with a bipolar disorder, it's intimidating. You automatically think that you're just going to get like crazy slapped across your forehead, that you don't know what you're not in charge of your own body. You don't know what you're actually thinking, what you're actually feeling. So every time they have to go to the hospital, it's like an anxiety in itself because they don't know if they're going to be taken seriously or not, which sucks and it's sad. And how do we destigmatize something? We can talk till we're blue in the face, but until we get everybody on board, it's going to remain this way.
Yeah. Especially when you add in other factors. So being a woman is already a factor where not everybody will take you seriously.
Minority.
Being a person of color,
Yeah.
being somebody that's trans is already not being taken seriously. And so there's multiple factors that can be affecting how you're being treated in the medical field. And then having a mental health diagnosis on top of that is just very unfortunate. So I think it's important to also find a talk therapist and a psychiatrist that you feel that unconditional positive regard, meaning you feel completely accepted. You feel I can share these things about myself and I don't feel that this person is judging me. And if you have to go through many different people to eventually find that person, in the end, it's worth it.
Can your talk therapist or like your psychiatrist, psychologist, whoever you're talking to for mental health, can they advocate for you in the medical field? Like when it comes to hospitalizations or something, can they advocate for you with doctors?
There's something called a release of information that the client would have to sign stating, I give you permission to talk to this individual. And it could be something like a letter. So I've written letters for clients, not necessarily for a medical doctor, but maybe for a psychiatrist. And I'll say, hey, I've been meeting with this person for X amount of time. This is what I'm suspecting their diagnosis is. Let's cooperate on it. And so collaborate on it. Sorry. Well, let's collaborate on it. And then we have that open line of communication because the client has allowed it. And then I will always, I do not prescribe any medication. I don't have a doctorate. I don't have a medical degree. I will always follow what the medicating doctor is stating is what's going on. I will adjust based off of what they're saying. And so that's also something to take into account. But I think you're asking in regards to like somebody going into a hospital. There's potential that a psychiatrist already has connections in the community. And if you have a psychiatrist and you need to go to an ER or you need to go to a hospital or you need to go see just a medical doctor in general, ask your psychiatrist, do you have any recommendations of who I should go see? Do you have any recommendations of a hospital I should go to? And they might have connections and they say, oh yeah, I know this person at this hospital. You go there, they're going to take good care of you because I know them. And so it doesn't hurt to have that line of communication with your person, especially if you've spent a long time with them and you've built that rapport already.
So if you have a client that comes in and says, hey, I'm dealing with suicidal thoughts. What do I need to do? And you recommend, I think you should go, get checked into a hospital. Is there a line of communication between them leaving your office and them being admitted so that
I
the doctor and you are on the same page?
Oh, usually they don't. Usually the admitting doctor, they don't even contact me. What will typically happen is paramedics will come to me and I stay with my client the entire time. I say, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, and I'm going to stay with you for as long as I need to. And the paramedics will come to me. They'll help me sign some documentation stating why I think this person needs to be admitted into the hospital. And then from there, they take them to the hospital.
So if the paramedic doesn't relay that to the hospital, then there's a breach in
Well,
communication
I
there.
believe they have to.
Yeah.
It's a paperwork that's stating like why this person is going in the first place.
Okay. I think when we were talking about different people that also get discounted, like minorities, trans, women, I think we can also add age in there. I think a lot of
Yeah.
teenagers get discounted.
And
Yeah.
elderly people.
I believe it.
Yes, people in the elderly community, it's so sad how they're treated as well. It's the very young and the very old.
Yeah. And I think people just like how we were talking about, it's hard to diagnose kids because they already have so much going on hormone wise. I think with teenagers, it's like, are you actually depressed or are you just breaking up with a boyfriend? And we tend to just kind of like shove teenagers in a corner, like go be hormonal by yourselves and deal with it on your own. And then once they get to be adults and they don't know how to handle mood swings or disorders and stuff like that, then we shame them for not having it together.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, nobody gave them the tools to begin with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Do you feel like your parents were supportive when you were in your teens, Casey?
Yeah, they've always been really supportive. Maybe sometimes too supportive. So like for a long time I kind of had to unlearn writing off things as like, oh well, I have bipolar, so I can get away with this. And I kind of had to be like, I need to be a little bit better and more take like responsibility for myself and my actions. And they were doing the best that they could with the information that they had and their take on the situation. So it's like nothing against them at all. Like if they listen to this, hello. But it's not their fault. It's just, we can always just try to do better about learning the best ways to handle things and how to help your family members live with a mental illness and be able to be independent and not use it as an excuse for bad behavior. Because some people do. They just are like, oh, well, I'm this or I'm that, so you can't get mad at me. And it's like, no, you're just being an asshole.
Yeah.
Like, that's not...
Oh, it's the same for zodiac signs. I'm not so annoying. I'm a Virgo. I don't give a shit. You're just an asshole.
Honestly.
When we were talking about bipolar being possibly, you said genetic, right? So usually from your parents. Do either of your parents deal with this or grandparents, or did it start with you?
Well, so my uncle that has schizophrenia, he is schizophrenic and bipolar.
Okay.
But schizophrenia is obviously it's the main one. It's his main issue. He has struggled his whole life. But he is such a nice man. Like, he is such good people. I know I've had I think either a great grandmother who had like electric shock therapy at
Ooh.
one point. So there've been lines of it. It's just not diagnosed. Like, I'm pretty sure my mother has always struggled with depression, but has never like been diagnosed with it. And I feel like it's a lot of my family is like that because it's, it wasn't as accepted
Right.
then. Like, we're getting better, I think, every generation of talking about it, getting it diagnosed. Because people are like, oh, well, autism didn't exist in the 1700s. I'm like, oh, but it did. It really, really did. It's just they were treated very differently.
Mm-hmm.
Same with, a lot of other mental illnesses. You look in history and you're like, I see you. Like, they might have thought you were just like possessed by a demon or something. But like with new information, we find out that is not the case. It was an undiagnosed mental illness. And they didn't know what to do with it. So, you know, we're growing, and now we've got shows like Bluey, which just like absolutely advocate like talking about your feelings and like working through things. And I think that that gives me so much more hope for the next generation, that they're going to be a lot more like emotionally open. And I've got a couple of friends that are in their like early to mid 20s. So like, I think they're technically Gen Z, at least a couple of them are. And they talk really openly about their mental health. And I really love seeing that. It's great to start up that conversation and lessen the stigma as much as possible.
Is bipolar possibly, how do I want to word this? Is it something that can be passed on not only genetically, but just from being in the environment of having a parent with it? Like nature versus nurture. If you have a adopted child, but they grow up in a house where you have a parent who rapid cycles or has depressive episodes, whatever the case may be, can that child also be at an increased risk for having it from being exposed to it?
Maybe
Or
not.
is this specifically a genetic?
Maybe not bipolar, but potentially another mental health diagnosis. So you're right about nature versus nurture. It's this ongoing discussion regarding mental health of, is this something I'm born with, or is this something that my environment has led me to experience? And potentially if you have an adoptive child and they're watching a parent struggle with depression and sitting on the couch all day long and not able to get up and feed them or shower or do basic needs, there's the potential that that child learns, when I'm sad, that's what I need to do. And it creates depression in that child. And I don't want to say that they're going to end up with it, but it's just how they've learned to cope with what they've seen. And it can, I believe it does further, it's a risk factor for a mental health diagnosis.
Do you have any tips or guidance, advice for anybody who might be newly diagnosed with bipolar? What kind of guidance would you give to somebody who's listening and is like, oh, I just got diagnosed and now it's all kind of feeling a little scary to me? And
Just hang in there. Like, that's not the best advice. It's going to be bumpy. But you will get a baseline. Like, if you keep working with your medicating doctor and do talk therapy and start, you know, finding ways to like helpfully cope with things, it does get better. It gets easier. And I have to lecture myself on this sometimes, where I get into that like pit of despair where I'm like, oh, man, I'm going to be like in my 60s and like have an episode, and that just sounds exhausting. But then I force myself to look at the good times, like the good things I've been able to experience that I can remember, because I also have terrible memory because of all the mental illness. The way my doctor described it is that your brain, when you're in like fight or flight mode, basically starts like erasing data that's not relevant.
Yes.
And I describe it as like clearing cookies like out of your cache.
oh, nice.
Or cache, however you say it. But sometimes I'm like, but brain, I wanted that. Like, I want to remember that movie I watched. Can I have it back, please? So that's also normal. Well, not normal, but like it can happen. So if you're experiencing that, you're not alone. That's the biggest thing, is that you're not alone. There are a lot of people who struggle, and like early diagnosis is like, you feel like you're in the Wild West, basically, because you don't know what meds are going to work. You might start one that just spirals you. Then call your doctor, work on it, get on a different one. And it's trial and error, but you'll get there. And the goods will feel really, really good, because you know how bad it can be. And it's rewarding to not feel like shit.
What do you do to help yourself when you're feeling like you're in that pit?
When I am in the headspace that I am able to actually do self-care versus just survival mode, I try to, and I fought this for so long, but my husband was so right, my doctors were so right. Regular exercise.
Oh, we've talked about that one a few times.
Like sometimes when I'm like able to start pulling myself out, because when I'm in it, I, like nothing. It is just survival mode. I like will sometimes eat. Like my husband has to remind me. He's like, "You will feel worse if you don't eat. Eat food helps." But I'll sometimes make myself get on the bike. I'm such a bad mood, and then afterwards, I'm like, "Damn it, it worked. I do feel better."
Yeah.
So like that definitely helps. Eating right helps. Like not just eating like a piece of bread, which sometimes I just will do for dinner because it's just like the brain is full of so many weasels and it's a mess. Like having a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner, and like snacks in between, and drinking water makes a really big difference that I'm always like grumbly about by the end of the day. I'm like, well, apparently you need to feed your body for your brain to work. And then, I don't know, finding things that bring you joy and making yourself do them. Like I have a bi-weekly D&D game. Sometimes I really don't feel like going, but I can't let them down because then like our DM would have to, change what the encounter was going to be like because we're down a person, have to explain why they're not there. So I'll drag myself and then it helps. It's kind of like, that's my talk therapy right now, which you should get a talk therapist, but we are so poor. So I just have my psych because she actually takes my insurance, which is the first time in my entire life. So it's $20.
Nice.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Like $100+ less than usual. But so there are doctors and like sliding scales, like there are options out there for all tax brackets. So yeah, this is the end of my sentence.
I love that. Oh, just a reminder for listeners, if you're looking for somebody, a psychiatrist or talk therapist, psychologytoday.com is a great resource to use. They have check boxes. You can select your insurance. You state your zip code that you live in, and it populates a list of therapists or psychiatrists that live in your area, and you can select from there.
I feel like Psychology Today should sponsor us.
Yeah,
You've
said
plugged them
lot.
a few times.
I know.
Yeah. If they get
So-
any business, we better be seeing a check, Psychology Today.
Yeah, guys, it's because I honestly really like this site. I'm not being sponsored.
How important is sleep?
Oh man,
Yeah, that's a good one.
Is it hard to sleep when you're manic?
yeah.
Yeah. Why?
Racing mind or like a lot of energy. I'm very grateful that my mania does not present in the not having to sleep. Because I know folks can go like 24+ hours without sleep because you can't turn it off. It's like your body's full of bees. Like you just have this like intense energy. You have to do something. But it doesn't necessarily feel good all the time. You have to do it. You can't sleep. Mine is mostly just like racing mind, but I'll get to sleep eventually either by like listening to some ASMR, or if like I'm having a really hard time, I'll take my clonazepam to be like, you need to chill out and sleep.
I imagine the lack of sleep probably adds to the mania. Right?
It makes everything so much worse.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of why like the first like 2 years of my son's life were so hard. He was a terrible sleeper.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't sleep through the night until 2.5. And it was brutal, especially because I was nursing. So it was me doing all the nighttime stuff. And that is not great when lack of sleep just like exacerbates your symptoms. So sleeping a proper amount of time, like sleeping in a row is nice. Like, 3 hours here and there, whatever. But like, I like when I can sleep 6 to 8 hours and not wake up
consecutively.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't always
What was
happen.
your post? You had mentioned you had PPD after you had your son. What was your postpartum period like with your bipolar disorder?
Everything was just awful.
I imagine with a newborn, it's really hard to not feel guilty being in a depressive episode or having mania, not feeling like your best, healthiest self with your baby?
It was, we were already pretty much firmly one and done before we had him. I am very, very firmly one and done after that because I have never been more scared than in that like period because the intrusive thoughts were like so intense and so scary. And I was worried with like, the underlying bipolar. I was like, what if I snap and hurt him? So oh God, it was awful.
That is
It
really
was
scary.
really, really bad. And going back to work at like 10 weeks made it worse. You should not be going back to work that early. And it was a very dark time. That's the closest I've ever come to being institutionalized. Like my doctor was literally like one more phone call from me or like my family away because my parents called him and like she is not well. But he was really supportive and he was honest with me too. He was like, I'm watching you and I need Michael to know when he needs to, make this happen, when he needs to take you. So he was also watching me throughout my whole pregnancy and afterwards because one of the patients that he's lost that stuck with him was a new mom because and him telling that to me really stuck with me where I was like, okay, I need to watch this because if he is afraid for me, not like afraid, but like very concerned, I also need to keep a close eye on it. And he told me what to tell my husband to watch for. And Michael was really good at being like, are we good? You gonna be okay? And I did it. I lived. It was not easy. But also if you have those kinds of thoughts after having a baby, you are not alone. Like I did not realize how common intrusive, like very intense intrusive thoughts were until after I was like sitting there being like, why am I thinking? What is wrong with me? Like, yeah. But I also don't want to discourage people with bipolar to not have a child if you don't, or if you want to have one, because like when I was pregnant, I felt great. Like my hormones were like super regulated, my emotions, and like my acne cleared up. I was like, this is awesome. But then afterwards, I was like, oh, they tricked me. But if you have a really good doctor who is going to like ride that out with you, I think that is the key if you want to have children with mental
Have a good
illness.
support system.
You have tons of support. You have your partner that's super supportive. You have your family that's super supportive.
I'm
You have
lucky.
a group of friends, your doctor. And so when we were talking about people that are newly diagnosed with bipolar, there's the potential that they're coming from a culture and environment where they don't have that support. And I think that it's very important to find your support system. It doesn't even have to be in mental health. It could be a D&D group that you enjoy meeting up with and they just fully accept you, or, just finding that person or people that can be there for you is so key and
Absolutely.
so important.
And what I would definitely recommend is finding a support group for other people with bipolar, because that was my first step in not feeling alone. Being like, oh, they have different symptoms than me, but like I can see myself in all of these things that they're doing. And it was really nice to be like, I can talk openly about this and know that it's more normal than maybe previously thought.
How'd you find your support group?
Google.
Yeah, just Google it, right? Bipolar support groups in my area.
Basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't been to one in a while because I kind of, it wasn't like necessarily suiting my needs anymore. But I'm glad that, and my husband went with me at first so that he could kind of see other ways it could present. And like I remember someone saying that when they were manic, they like rented a really tall ladder and painted their entire like living room overnight. And I was like, wow, that's some energy. But it was just really eye-opening to see the varying degrees because we had the full range of bipolar 1, bipolar 2, people that are in and out of hospitals, people that are relatively stable. And that was just, it was really nice. I mean, it sucks to have it, but it's nice to be around other people that get it. I would also say, like, circling back just a little bit about like MDs and mental health, find one that supports you for like your main things. Like, I ended up sticking with my OBGYN even after my insurance changed and I had to pay him out of pocket for my pregnancy because he was the first one I'd ever seen that talked to me about my anxiety. He talked to me about certain things. And I remember when I had the baby, he was off that weekend, but I heard him on the phone talking to my nurse, being like, she has really bad anxiety. Please take care of her.
Oh, that's so
Like,
sweet.
and they, oh God, they did. They
Yeah.
were, I got really lucky. Like, I had
Yeah.
such a good team. I had him a month early and they were like really supportive and nice. And he was just a giant baby, but he was done. And I was like, cool, me too. I don't want to be pregnant anymore.
A good doctor is a game changer.
It
Yes.
really is.
So if you are battling something that is going to use more of a diagnostic manual to get to your diagnosis, what's a good way to present your concerns to your partner, to your parents? Because I think maybe people are intimidated by having a conversation and bringing up their concerns because they're afraid that they're going to be discounted or not taken seriously. So how do you bring that to your spouse or your parents and say, look, I'm really serious about this?
I think it depends on what that system looks like and what you know of how they handle mental health talks. So it's kind of one of those things, being honest is really, really, really important, but maybe presenting it in a way that they will understand or sometimes I think you have to soften the blow a little bit because it is so stigmatized and just like maybe like baby steps at it. Again, I'm not a professional. That could be terrible advice. Don't listen to me.
No, I think that's great. I also think that,
You want to make sure you're safe.
yes, yeah. And it depends on how comfortable you feel to disclose what's going on. And I mean, I don't encourage this, but if there's a reason why you feel uncomfortable to disclose to your partner or your family members or your friends exactly the specifics of what's going on, listen to that gut feeling in the beginning at least, and just say, keep it somewhat vague. I feel that I need to go see a professional. I'm struggling. I'm going to make this appointment. I hope that you support me in this, regarding if you want them to come or not with you. But when you're meeting with a talk therapist or a doctor, you can ask their opinion. I haven't told my partner or I haven't told these people what's going on. What do you suggest? How should we do this? And they might bring those people in to the office with you and say, hey, let's talk about this together. That might be the support that you need, is to have that professional there to help explain things for you. Or it could be something of, you know what, let's wait and let's continue to maybe role play how you want to tell these people and practice it. And when you feel comfortable and ready, you can do that. So there's options out there of maybe what feels comfortable for you.
In your experience, are normally unsupportive spouses or parents more receptive to hearing that kind of stuff from an outside party than they are to their person?
Yes, absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
It could just be somebody different explaining it in a different way. Maybe they've listened to their partner or their family member or friend or whoever say the same thing over and over and over again. So maybe it's a woman. I'll just use a example. Maybe it's a woman battling with depression and she's in a relationship with a male, and he doesn't understand depression. And he's like, just get up, just clean, just suck it up and
Just
get
go
over
outside.
it. Yeah, just get over it and just get these things done. And sometimes it takes somebody else to say, hey, like moments where you have a really bad day at work and your boss has belittled you and you come home and you can't get things done. That's how she feels all the time. Just like relating it in a different way. And then all of a sudden it clicks in their head and they're like, oh, now I get it. Now I understand why she's struggling so badly. And then having that outside person say, this is how you can be supportive for this person and how you can make things better instead of maybe the things that you typically say that make things worse. And then they realize it and say, oh, okay, all right, I got it. And it's not necessarily that they are, it could just be a lack of education, a lack of awareness, just not knowing, ignorance sometimes keeps us stuck. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad person. It just could be, I've never heard it a different way and I've never experienced it, so I don't understand.
Are there any major differences between the way that bipolar presents in men versus women?
I personally haven't seen diagnostic differences necessarily. Casey and I were talking before we started that it's more common in women than men. The diagnosis is typically more found in women than it is in men. But the symptoms are pretty similar from what I've seen.
And what are some of the key symptoms? If somebody's listening and they're not really sure what's going on, what are some of the biggest things? The biggest like check boxes?
It's the struggling with managing the emotions. It's the depressive episodes that last for X amount of time, the mania or hypomania. And sometimes it takes a while to identify that hypomania because it could just look like somebody being productive in an outsider's perspective. And so that's why it's important to meet with a professional to be able to see these things and say, okay, this is what I think it is. And like, let's rule it out and actually get a diagnosis.
So what does mania feel like exactly? Can you put it into words?
It depends. A lot of times it just feels like I'm in a good mood, kind of more like hyper, more social. Like as far as like physical feelings, when it's just like it's normal hypomania, it feels normal. Maybe more prone to like anxiety because I'm already kind of like heightened. When I really notice it is when we go into the mixed episode where you're have that energy but are very depressed, and I feel they're terrible. They physically feel like it's like the bee thing, like your body's full of bees, and all you can think about is how like casual suicidal ideation, which like I have constantly, but it's louder when they kind of like combine like that. I think that's when I like feel it in the moment more than when it's just on its own, if that makes sense.
So I want to clarify. So you said it's like having the energy of being manic, but in a depressive episode.
Yeah.
So it's like an upper and a downer. That sounds exhausting.
Yeah, they're terrible. Do not recommend.
What were you talking about? Casual suicide ideations. What is that?
It's when it just kind of like comes in the way, for me at least. It's something that I think about, but have never made a plan, never really thought about enacting. It's just more of like, you're sitting there and you're like, what if I just died? Like that would be okay, right? Like, it's whatever. It's kind of like it's like a gray area of being suicidal where it's like the risk factor I feel like is always still there, but it's kind of like just hopelessness and just I don't know, or sometimes they're just like random intrusive thoughts where it's like you could just drive your car off of the interstate and die, and I'd be like, no, thank you, I'm good. I'm gonna keep listening to my AJR and driving. But I think that's another thing that's not talked about enough and is kind of like pretty taboo is to mention anything about suicide. We should talk about it more because I think it'll make people feel less alone. Like I have a great support system, like a great kid, and I love my husband, but I still think about killing myself. But not on purpose, if that makes sense. It's just like my brain is being a bully. And kicks in like that imposter syndrome, like at the hard, thing, like, oh, it's not worth it. Like, but stop. Brain, just chill. But it doesn't ever chill. And that's not true. It does chill.
Your brain's like, Casey, we noticed you were having a great day today. You know what we haven't thought about? Slitting our wrists. We should talk about it.
It's exactly like that though. Sometimes where I'm like, come on, it was such a good day. Like, I don't want to do that. And it's like, but you could think about it. Like, no. And that's why I take my anxiety showers where I close the door, turn the lights off, and just stand in really hot water. And that's my grounding. Which it's very good to find like a grounding thing, like something that kind of like brings you off the edge where you just like have to just like sensory deprivation almost sometimes.
Do you ever use box breathing?
I don't know what that is. I mean, I know both those words, but not together.
Okay, so I'm going to explain it. If you're watching, it'll be a little bit different than for audio listeners. So you put your hands in your midsection like this. You're going to breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. So it's a box. So breathe in, hold,
1, 2, 3, 4.
release,
Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4.
hold.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Kind of brings you back, and you're focusing on something that's not your surroundings.
That's breathing exercises are great, and finding ones that like work for you. Like, I'm gonna try that one. I've also heard that like eating something sour can kind of snap you out of it a little bit. Cold, like ice cubes,
In your hands.
can help. It's just like sometimes it feels like your brain is just taken off out of your body and you are losing control. So you got to find ways to bring yourself back down to at least a like manageable whatever is happening. So for me, that's the hot showers with my mental thrillness playlist. Because you gotta joke about it. It's otherwise it's more fun if you just laugh at yourself sometimes.
With intrusive thoughts, I have to have like an internal conversation with myself. Like I call it a board meeting because I have all the different parts of my brain trying to come to one conclusion. But I have to talk myself down in a way that I'm realizing that I'm safe. So malls are a big thing for me. We'll take our kids there, just kind of walk around. We'll grab some Starbucks or go to the food court. And it's just cool to get out, but still in air conditioning and to just kind of walk around, get some exercise. But and this is probably a trigger warning, I just want to advise, I have an intense fear of active shooter situations. And a mall has a lot of different areas where sounds could go off and you may not know where it's coming from. So I have a fear of like places like malls. And so sometimes when my kids get too far away from me or I'm standing in line and I'm like, I'll have like active shooter scenarios going through my head, like where am I going to go? Where's the nearest exit? That kind of stuff. I have to talk myself down and be like, currently we are safe. You can see the kids. No one's going to steal them. No one's coming in. I have to have this conversation in my head where I'm like, we're okay. Physically, we have no pain. The kids are cool. They're fed. They're happy. We're safe. And sometimes it'll take me a few seconds and Bobby will start to notice my face and be like, okay, what's going on? I'm like, just having a board meeting. It's fine. Just ignore me. We're good. Just let me have this time.
Good.
Yeah.
That's actually very healthy though, to do that, to do the internal dialogue.
Is it?
It is. It's very healthy. I use scenarios with clients of like, imagine you're in front of a judge and
Immediate anxiety.
yeah, well, like
Courthouses give me anxiety.
Well, like a courthouse scenario where there's the judge and there's two different lawyers and it's the two sides of your brain that are making an argument, and how are you going to combat both? And so just like presenting all of the information and talking with yourself about it's very healthy to do those things. And like Casey said, it's also very healthy to talk about any suicidal thoughts, ideation that you're having, especially with a professional. Don't be scared. We talk about these things. We know how to talk to you about it. It's not scary for us. We can handle it. And just to normalize it and just to say like, hey, this is how I'm feeling and this is what's going on is very healthy to do, and say, okay, like let's talk more about it. You know, like maybe there's something triggering you, or like let's find healthy ways to cope. Like Casey has pretty good healthy coping skills. What helps her?
Do you journal?
I've tried so many times.
Yeah, it's not for you.
No. And I've tried like mood journaling as well. But then when I start to go into shutdown mode, that's one of the first things to go.
Yeah.
Do you have something that helps you track your emotions so
That-
you can kind of reflect?
I've tried. I've had a bunch of different apps and I'll like stick with them for a while and then it doesn't happen. I think it's so great in theory. I really want to do it. Maybe one day. Not today, but maybe one day.
Do you do any mindfulness or meditation, anything?
No.
No?
No.
Just the showers. The showers are like a game changer for you.
Yeah, it's I could definitely do better at how I cope.
I want to tell you though, what you were saying about the ice cubes in the hand, eating something sour, taking your super hot shower with the lights off, listening to music, that is all mindfulness. All of those things are mindfulness. It's about bringing yourself back into the present situation of what's going on. And so you're using temperature on your skin, how you feel. You're using the lights, which is what you see. You're using music, what you listen to. Again, temperature in your hands of the ice cubes. Putting something in your mouth that's sour is using your taste. So all of those things are using your five senses, and it's mindfulness.
Cool.
You
So
were
you
being
are doing
mindful
it.
and you didn't even know.
Yeah.
Look at you.
You're welcome.
Was there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up this episode?
No, let's ask Casey our questions of what are 3 things that you do for your mental health.
I play Dungeons and Dragons.
Excellent.
I watch cooking competition shows,
Oh.
but also sometimes pottery competition shows.
Whoa.
The Great Pottery Throwdown on HBO Max, not sponsoring us, but they should, is like Great British Baking Show for pottery. It's so soothing. It's just really great for the brain.
I love me some Great British Baking.
It's so good.
So good.
And the third is like letting loose when it is like healthy, but not by going crazy. I mean like having like half an edible and watching a weird movie with my partner.
I
It's,
stan.
like,
I don't know what that word is. I've heard it. It means I support, I think.
well, it's from the Eminem song, which it's very problematic considering its source. Do you know where? Oh,
No.
And if I'm wrong, like Zoomers don't come for me, but this is my understanding of this particular slang. So Eminem did a song
Stan.
a billion years ago called Stan, and it was
Yes.
about an obsessive fan who was like writing to Eminem through the whole song, and then like does like a homicide suicide situation like at the end.
Yeah, with his pregnant girlfriend.
Yeah.
It's a horrific song.
So we stand and we shouldn't. It's not, but
Okay, I won't use it anymore. I didn't know it was for that song.
that's what I've heard. I could be wrong. Yeah, the internet is full of lies.
Okay. In my millennialness, what I actually mean was that I support you taking an edible and watching weird movies. Have you watched Midsummer?
Not yet.
Okay. That's your therapy homework. Have an edible, watch Midsummer. You will regret it. But it's an experience in itself.
I know all the story beats of Midsummer, but I need to watch it. I do love Florence Pugh, and also
She's amazing.
A24. I love A24.
I don't
That's
know what that is.
they're who did Midsummer. It's the
Like
the
production?
people that there we go. The people that made the movie.
The people behind the cameras. Okay, well, that'll wrap up this episode. Thanks for sitting down with us. I can't wait for this to go on. Go check out our Instagram. It's at Nora's Table Podcast. Same with Facebook and YouTube. And we're giving a special shout out to Ignis Umbra Studio, who sponsored our podcast. Nice guy. So that we have good audio to bring to you.
And a great space.
Yeah, for sure.
And they do
so
photo
soothing.
shoots too. So if you're in Las Vegas, check out Ignis Umbra's website and schedule a shoot. Richard takes amazing photos.
Yeah, go follow him on his socials also.
Yeah.
So you can see that stuff. Good stuff. Okay, we will catch you guys next time.